The ID card clattered against the marble floor, its sharp sound slicing through the quiet grandeur of Sterling Financial Bank's lobby. Anderson Mitchell, senior manager of the institution, had just tossed the identification of a 60-year-old black man to the ground as if it were a crumpled receipt. "I'm sorry," Anderson said with a smirk, adjusting the knot of his designer tie, "but documents like these don't exactly scream credibility." He watched, unbothered, as the man stooped down to retrieve his card. "Perhaps a different bank would be more aligned with your profile." Roberto Silva, crouched low, didn't flinch. His fingers, steady and precise, picked up the card without trembling. At 60, his posture spoke of a lifetime spent facing far greater storms than the pomp of an arrogant banker. When he rose, his gaze met Anderson's with a disarming composure that unsettled more than any shouted response ever could. Around them, an uncomfortable stillness settled. A well-dressed woman murmured to her husband, nodding subtly toward Roberto. Two men in suits halted their discussion, curiosity flickering across their features. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed louder in the heavy silence. "I understand completely," Roberto said, his voice smooth, measured, and devoid of rancor. "I came to complete a simple transaction, but it seems perhaps this isn't the right place for it." Anderson rolled his eyes and turned toward Paula, his assistant, who had witnessed the entire exchange with growing discomfort. "It's always the same with these people," he muttered, loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "They think walking through the door means they understand the game." What Anderson didn't realize was that Roberto Silva was no ordinary man. His clothes might have been simple, but his demeanor radiated a quiet authority. The lines in his face were etched from years of hard-earned wisdom. His hands, scarred from work, bore the history of dedication. But it was his eyes, clear, alert, and unflinching, that betrayed a deeper truth. Roberto carried secrets that powerful men would pay to learn, and he had no intention of revealing them just yet. Paula, her voice uncertain, tried to ease the tension. "May I ask what brought you in today, Mr. Silva?" "I was looking to open a business account," he replied plainly. "My daughter mentioned you specialize in services for large corporations." Anderson let out a sharp laugh, incredulous. "Large corporations, really?" He gave Roberto a once-over, barely concealing his disdain. "Mr. Silva, maybe you don't quite grasp the kind of clientele we serve. We're talking billion-dollar deals, international investors, high-stakes ventures." What he didn't know, what he hadn't cared to ask, was that Roberto wasn't there by chance. For months, his daughter had spoken glowingly about Sterling Financial at family dinners. "We're finalizing a $5 billion deal with them, Dad," she had said. "Biggest in our company's history." As Anderson rattled on, lost in his own arrogance, Roberto quietly observed the bank's polished facade, rich clients welcomed with practiced smiles, premium coffee served to anyone in a suit, private rooms opened for the affluent like stage doors. The differences in treatment weren't subtle, they were systemic. "I see your point," Roberto said, interrupting the monologue with a note of calm finality. "Indeed, large corporations deserve partners who can handle the weight of their vision." Something in his tone gave Anderson pause. For a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crept in, but he dismissed it just as quickly, brushing aside any lingering doubt. At the revolving door, instead of leaving with his head low, Roberto pulled out his phone and sent a short message. "Camila, I need to talk to you about Sterling Financial. It's urgent." Her reply came almost instantly. "Is something wrong, Dad? I'm reviewing the final contracts with them right now. Let's just say I had an illuminating experience with their customer service. Can we talk tonight?" "Of course. Are you okay?" Roberto's eyes drifted once more to Anderson, now fawning over a blonde woman in a tailored gray suit. A quiet smile formed at the corner of his lips. Some lessons, he thought, come with heavy consequences, especially when arrogance blinds a man to who he's actually dealing with. He stepped outside into the sunlight, not defeated, not angry, just calm, like a man who had seen what he came to see and confirmed what he already knew. Inside the bank, the moment faded into the background. But on the 20th floor, during a lunch soaked in wine and ego, Anderson couldn't resist turning the morning's incident into a joke. He relished the spotlight as he recounted it. for the third time. At a table surrounded by executives, "You should have seen his face when I dropped the ID," Anderson said, chuckling as he carved into his grilled salmon, tried to hold his dignity, but you know how they are, always thinking they belong in places like this. Paula stirred her salad without appetite, clearly uneasy. Maybe he did own a company. "You didn't even check." "Oh, Paula," Anderson replied, tone dripping with condescension. "I've been doing this for 8 years. I can smell a real client from a mile away." That man didn't even have a gold card. Laughter followed, but there was an edge to Anderson's tone, too loud, too insistent, like he was trying to convince himself. The old man's calm, unwavering gaze lingered in his memory in a way that irritated him. "I was doing him a favor," he added, sipping his wine. Imagine how embarrassing it would have been when he found out. He didn't even meet the minimum deposit requirement. "I saved everyone time." What Anderson didn't know was that while he boasted upstairs, Roberto was seated at his daughter's marble kitchen island, flipping through papers that could single-handedly ruin his assumptions and possibly his career. "Dad, you look distracted," Camila said, pouring him a cup of coffee worth more than Anderson's monthly wardrobe. "Something happened at the bank." Roberto exhaled slowly. "Let's just say it was enlightening. The kind of clarity you only get when people show you exactly who they are." "Who did?" "The manager, Anderson Mitchell, according to his badge. He made it clear what sort of clients they value." "Very clear." Camilla's brow furrowed. The name struck her. She had seen it before on internal reports tied to the very contract she was preparing to sign. Anderson Mitchell, a name now tethered to arrogance, prejudice, and a choice that would soon prove costly. Because some men, like Roberto Silva, do not raise their voices or throw fits. They watch, they take note, and when the time comes, they make sure justice is delivered with the quiet power of someone who never needed validation to begin with. For much of the groundwork that would shape the partnership set to transform both companies, Roberto had remained in the background. But now, as his daughter looked at him across the sleek kitchen table, her voice low and probing, she asked, "Dad, do you want to tell me exactly what happened?" Roberto sighed, nodding slightly, and recounted everything from the moment he stepped into the pristine marble-floored lobby of Sterling Financial to the cold instant his ID card was hurled and clattered across the floor. As he spoke, he watched his daughter's face evolve, first concern, then something sharper, colder. Camila Silva, the iron-willed CEO known in boardrooms for her precision and ruthless calm, had been born with a fire that only ever burned hotter. When someone disrespected those she loved, "He threw your ID on the floor." Her voice was disturbingly measured, the kind of calm that carried the weight of a brewing storm. "As if it were garbage," Roberto said quietly. "But don't trouble yourself, Hija. I've seen worse." And he had. Roberto Silva had clawed his way out of the trenches of systemic prejudice in the 1980s, a time when no bank would lend to a black man with a dream. He sold everything he owned, labored day and night, building low-cost homes brick by brick with his own calloused hands. Years later, he sold that company for a fortune, a figure known to very few, his wealth hidden in international portfolios and smart investments scattered across 3 countries. But he had never cared for flashy suits or loud declarations. His dignity had always worn the quiet of humility. It was fascinating, actually, he added, voice laced with something unreadable, watching how that bank operates, especially knowing what they're about to enter into with you. Camila didn't respond immediately, but her gaze hardened. Her posture straightened with the unmistakable stance of someone preparing for war. $5 billion, Dad. The biggest deal our company has ever pursued. I wonder how their senior leadership would react if they knew the man they humiliated this morning is my father. That evening, as Anderson Mitchell, senior manager at Sterling Financial, sipped aged scotch at an upscale restaurant and updated his LinkedIn profile with a post about upholding premium customer service standards, his friends and colleagues showered him with praise in the comments, complimenting his uncompromising dedication to professionalism. He didn't know that, across the city, Roberto was on a video call with Camilla's 3 senior partners, smiling into the camera with a calm, practiced air. "I want you to meet my father," Camila announced. "Roberto Silva. He'll be advising us informally on this partnership. The wisest man I know." Roberto gave a small wave, his face betraying none of the calculations already ticking quietly behind his eyes. "Pleasure to meet you," he said warmly. "Camila has told me about the deal with Sterling Financial. Very interesting." As the conversation unfolded, Roberto asked questions that sounded casual, just the curiosity of a concerned father. Who were the main contacts at the bank? What were the implementation deadlines? How easily could the agreement be reversed? And then, almost as an afterthought, he posed a question that made the partners glance at each other. "By the way, what's the bank's stance on discrimination? I imagine a partner at our scale would want strong values on record." "That's a great point, Mr. Silva," one replied after a beat. "We'll make sure to cover that in the final contract review." That night, while Anderson fell asleep in his luxurious penthouse, blissfully unaware, Roberto remained awake, quietly scanning every line of the deal his daughter was about to close. He was a man who had known real struggle, who had felt the bite of shame and the sting of being overlooked, but also a man who had built empires from dust. Anderson and his team thought they'd broken an old man's pride. They had no idea they'd awakened something else entirely. Real strength doesn't roar, it grows in silence, fueled by injustice, and sometimes it waits for just the right moment to strike. 3 days after the incident, before dawn lit the sky, Roberto opened his closet and removed the one suit he'd kept untouched for years. His old Hugo Boss, tailored and sharp. He slipped into it slowly, buttoning the jacket with purpose. This wasn't a day for modesty. This was a day to remind the world exactly who he was. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Camila asked as they stood in the boardroom, the table, covered in thick folders and final drafts, which she'd reviewed over and over with growing unease. "Once we back out, there's no going back. $5 billion, Dad. That's just numbers." He cut in softly. "What's priceless is respect, and that's ours to demand." And with that, the storm began to move. Almost half of the company's annual revenue was on the line. Roberto adjusted his cuffs with quiet confidence and offered a knowing smile. "Daughter, one thing I've learned in all these years of building businesses: money can be regained, but dignity, that takes decades to rebuild once it's lost." The table before them was littered with documents, termination clauses, financial forecasts, partnership contracts. Camila had spent the night with her legal team, scrutinizing every detail, crafting an escape so seamless it wouldn't leave a legal fingerprint. Clause 17 grants us the right to terminate the agreement unilaterally in the event of discriminatory behavior from the institution, explained Dr. Enrique Mora, a seasoned attorney with over 15 years in the field. "But we'll need undeniable proof." "Leave that to me," Roberto said, sliding a folder toward him with the ease of a man used to handling the fates of corporations. Inside were screenshots, records, and timestamps that made even Mora, unshaken after decades in law, go still. It was Anderson Mitchell's LinkedIn activity, 2 years of carefully disguised bias, posts dressed as concerns for standards, comments beneath diversity articles that hinted at something more sinister, likes on content that no corporate figure should ever publicly endorse. "Dear God," Mora muttered. "How did you get this?" Roberto leaned back. "When you've been in this game since you were 20, you learn that the real currency is information. Anderson Mitchell isn't just arrogant, he's reckless." While the Silva family laid their traps with precision, Anderson floated through what he assumed was another triumphant week. He'd recently posted on LinkedIn celebrating a quarter of growth, and basked in the praise of colleagues. That same day, he proudly told Paula he had rejected 3 unfit candidates for high-value corporate accounts. "Some people just don't get that we uphold very high standards," he said, sipping his imported espresso. "It's about maintaining the bank's image." Paula, who had been in his shadow long enough to hear far more than she should have, shifted uncomfortably. The recent incident with Roberto had stuck with her. "Have you ever wondered if maybe we're being too selective?" "Paula, sweetheart," Anderson said with patronizing calm, "you're still new. Over time, You develop a sense and instinct for who fits in and who doesn't. What he didn't know was that at that exact moment, Roberto was being greeted with reverence across town at his daughter's company. The receptionist welcomed him as Mr. Silva, strategic advisor, and employees greeted him with quiet respect. "Dad, meet Marcus Thompson, our CFO," Camila said, ushering him into a glass-walled meeting room overlooking the skyline. Marcus extended a hand with the reverence reserved for corporate legends. "Mr. Silva, it's truly an honor. Camila often tells us about your business instincts." What followed was a masterclass in leadership. Roberto's questions sliced through the data. His analysis was cold and clear. Every suggestion he made carried the weight of decades of success. What would be the financial impact if we ended our partnership with Sterling Financial? Roberto asked casually. Marcus glanced at the report in front of him. It would sting, but it wouldn't sink us. Commonwealth National is already offering more favorable terms. Camila and her father exchanged a glance. The plan was moving forward like clockwork. "There's more," Roberto said, his voice shifting from businesslike to coldly deliberate. "I did some more digging on Anderson Mitchell. He's not just casually prejudiced, his behavior is patterned." He pushed another folder across the table. This one contained internal emails leaked by a disgruntled former employee. Anderson's words were chilling. He referred to Latino clients as cultural risks and openly questioned the credibility of black entrepreneurs in internal correspondence. Marcus stared at the papers, his face pale. "If this ever goes public, it won't," Roberto interrupted smoothly. "We're not leaking it. We're using it strategically." At that very moment, Anderson was having lunch at his favorite high-end bistro. He posted a photo of his truffle risotto with a #executive life caption. Compliments poured in. His lifestyle, his image, his ego, all perfectly polished. What he didn't realize was that every one of his online footprints was being meticulously archived by Roberto's team. Every post, every smug comment, every trace of his arrogance saved. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Camila asked gently, seeing the fire still burning in his eyes. "He humiliated me because he thought I didn't matter," Roberto said. "Tomorrow, he'll understand that some people are far more powerful than they appear." That night, while Anderson drifted off to sleep, fantasizing about promotions and headlines, Roberto stayed awake, reviewing files, double-checking evidence, polishing the final piece of a takedown that would redefine the city's banking scene. When Anderson had thrown that ID card on the marble floor, he believed he was flexing his authority. But those who understand real power know it doesn't strut. It doesn't shout. It waits. And when it moves, it is absolute. At dawn, Roberto rose early and dressed with care. His Hugo Boss suit seemed to fit him differently today, like armor. This time, it wasn't just about restoring his pride. This time, someone else would feel the sting of public disgrace. "Camila, are you certain you want to go through with this?" Dr. Mora asked one final time as he reviewed the termination papers. "Once these are signed, there's no undoing it. My father taught me something," she replied. "That dignity is non-negotiable, and $5 billion won't buy back what was taken from him." At Sterling Financial, Anderson walked in beaming. A message had informed him of an urgent meeting with key strategic partners at 10 a.m. In his delusional mind, it could only mean one thing. "Paula, have my desk polished and brew the special coffee," Anderson commanded, adjusting the gold tie he reserved for significant moments. "Today marks the beginning of my rise." By 9:45 a.m., Anderson was in his office reviewing the final details for the morning's critical meeting when Paula appeared at the doorway, her face ghostly pale. "Anderson, there's a problem. The Silva family is here for the meeting." He frowned, confused. "Silva? I don't know any Silva important enough to be part of a strategic meeting." "It's the man from yesterday," Paula said, her voice tight. "He's here with a woman who introduced herself as the CEO of Coleman Industries." Anderson's veins turned to ice. Coleman Industries, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, the very company that was about to finalize a deal that would catapult his career. "No," Anderson muttered, scrambling to his computer, fingers trembling as he typed. The name, Roberto Silva. The result hit him like a punch to the gut. Roberto Silva, age 60, retired businessman, father of Camila Silva, CEO of Coleman Industries, estimated family net worth, $120 million. No, he repeated under his breath, stumbling through the corridor toward the main conference room. When he flung the door open, the nightmare materialized. Roberto Silva was seated at the head of the table, composed, dignified, and dressed in the same elegant suit he'd worn the day before, though it looked entirely different in this context. At his side sat a striking woman in her 40s, every inch the embodiment of executive power. "Mr. Mitchell," Camila Silva began in a voice cold enough to chill steel. "I believe you've already met my father." Anderson attempted a weak smile, but his body betrayed him. His legs were visibly shaking. "Mr. Silva, yesterday, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know that I was important." Roberto cut in, his tone polite but razor sharp. "Interesting. I thought Sterling Financial treated all its clients with respect regardless of how they're dressed." At that moment, the regional director, Michael Thompson, burst into the room, visibly flustered. "Miss Silva, Mr. Silva, I deeply apologize for any inconvenience. Sanderson, step outside." "No," Camila said, gently setting down an elegant briefcase and opening it. "We'd like Mr. Mitchell to stay. After all, he played a pivotal role in our decision-making." Anderson felt sweat bead at his neck. "What decision?" Roberto's smile was calm. "The decision to cancel our $5 billion partnership with Sterling Financial." A silence fell. Across the room, heavy and merciless, Michael Thompson looked as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. "Camila, Miss Silva, surely we can resolve this. Anderson will be disciplined, I assure you." Michael's voice trailed off as Roberto rose, commanding the room without raising his voice. "When your employee throws a client's ID on the floor, like garbage, it's not just personal disrespect, it exposes the entire culture behind your institution." Anderson scrambled to justify himself. "I was following fraud protocol. It's standard procedure, standard procedure." Camila slid several printed pages across the table. "Here are screenshots from your LinkedIn over the last 2 years, Mr. Mitchell. Posts about filtering out unfitting clientele. Likes on content with racial undertones. This wasn't an isolated lapse, it's a pattern." The evidence was suffocating. Publicly shared opinions, engagements with discriminatory views. It was a digital trail of quiet, calculated prejudice that's taken out of context. Anderson stammered, "Just like you took my father's ID and threw it on the ground?" Camilla's voice barely rose, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. Michael tried to interject again. "We can terminate Anderson immediately. Sterling does not stand by this behavior. It's too late," Roberto said, his tone final. "Yesterday, you humiliated me as just another old man in simple clothes. Today, I walk in as the father of the CEO you just lost." Anderson sank into a chair, the full weight of his unraveling career pressing down on him. $5 billion. His future. His name, gone in a matter of seconds that now stretched into eternity. "Please," he whispered. "I didn't know. I can learn. I can change." "You did know," Roberto said, voice steady, unshaken. "You knew I was a person. That was all the information you needed to treat me with decency." As Camila and Roberto gathered their things, he paused at the door and looked back at Anderson one last time. "Do you know the difference between us, Mr. Mitchell? You judged me by my appearance. I judged you by your character, and only one of us turned out to have anything of worth to offer." The door shut behind them with a soft but final thud, leaving Anderson alone amid the wreckage. In the hallway, hushed conversations had already started spreading the story how the most monumental partnership in the bank's history had been torn apart by arrogance disguised as caution. Anderson sat there, numb. That moment marked the beginning of a lesson he would never forget. That some people carry a quiet power, unseen until it's challenged by the blindness of pride. That real strength doesn't boast, it doesn't need to, it simply waits. And when it acts, it leaves behind silence and ruins. 2 weeks later, Anderson Mitchell wiped down his desk one last time. the cold reality of his dismissal settling in like dust over the polished surface. No negotiation. No second chance, just 8 years at Sterling Financial reduced to a cardboard box and bitter glances from those who used to call him sir. The murmurs followed him through the hallways. Did he really think he could treat clients like that and walk away unscathed? Paula, once his assistant, now held his former title. She watched him leave, her eyes reflecting both pity and a deep sense of poetic justice. The man Anderson had belittled Roberto Silva was no ordinary walk-in. He was, in fact, the father of the bank's most valuable client, a detail Anderson had dismissed because it came wrapped in worn clothes and dark skin. The final insult. The story of Anderson's arrogance had gone viral across Sterling's internal channels, shared in hushed tones and WhatsApp groups, always with the same cutting reminder: never judge a book by its cover. As for the Silvas, they went on to finalize an even more significant partnership, not with Sterling, but with Commonwealth National Bank, a deal worth $5.2 billion, $300 million more than Sterling's original proposal. Marcus Chun, president of Commonwealth, had been won over not just by the figures, but by the Silva family's legacy of integrity. Mr. Silva, Marcus had said, shaking his hand, it's an honor to work with a family that holds dignity above profit. That's rare in our world. Roberto replied with a quiet smile. True partners are the ones who treat you with respect from the first handshake, not after learning your net worth. Word of the collapse deal spread like wildfire through the financial industry. Anderson's name became synonymous with lost opportunity. 3 months later, he was still jobless. Interviewers would nod at his resume until they realized who he was. Bo, you're Anderson, the guy who blew the $5 billion contract. Thanks for coming. We'll be in touch. They never were. One gray morning, Anderson sat alone in a budget cafe nursing a bitter cup of coffee when Roberto walked in. Dressed modestly as before, he looked every bit the man Anderson once dismissed, except now Anderson knew better. Roberto paid for his coffee, then turned toward Anderson's table and paused. Good morning, Anderson, he said calmly. How's the job search going? Anderson swallowed, shame tightening his throat. Mr. Silva, I want to apologize. I didn't know you knew. Roberto interrupted gently. You knew enough that I was a human being deserving of basic respect. Everything else didn't matter. I'm trying to change. I can change. Roberto gave a thoughtful nod. I hope you do, because the next person you judge by appearance might have a daughter even more powerful than mine. And with that, he walked away, leaving Anderson with nothing but a bitter truth. Some lessons come too late to salvage a reputation wrecked by one's own arrogance. 6 months passed. Coleman Industries, now partnered with Commonwealth, had grown by 40%. Roberto, officially appointed as a strategic consultant for his daughter's firm, had transformed his office into a mentorship space especially for young entrepreneurs who, like him, faced judgment before being seen. You turned your humiliation into a lifeline for hundreds, Camila told him one afternoon as they watched him advise a young black entrepreneur. Rejected by 3 banks. Roberto smiled. The best revenge isn't tearing down those who hurt you. It's building something so great they realize how small they always were. Sterling Financial never recovered from the debacle. Their downfall became a case study in business schools across the country. A cautionary tale of how prejudice can obliterate profit. Paula, now a regional manager, launched a diversity and inclusion initiative that became the gold standard for the industry. Above her desk, she hung a framed quote, "Respect first, ask questions later." A year after the incident, Roberto was invited to speak at the National Banking Convention. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on Anderson, sitting quietly near the back, no longer a power player, but an insurance salesman in a faded suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Roberto began, "today I want to share how 5 seconds of disrespect cost a financial institution $5 billion. Anderson stared at the floor, the weight of his downfall pressing heavier with every word. He had once thought himself untouchable until the very man he tried to humiliate rewrote the story in ways Anderson could never have imagined. Roberto ended his speech with a message that rippled through the room. The difference between dignity and discrimination isn't in the wealth of the person you're serving. It's in the character of the one doing the serving. Applause followed him off stage. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson that would shape how thousands of professionals treated others from that day forward. That ID card, tossed so carelessly to the marble floor, hadn't shattered Roberto's dignity. It had only exposed the fragile ego of a man who mistook cruelty for strength. Anderson tried to break Roberto. Instead, he broke himself. And Roberto? He realized that real justice doesn't come from revenge, it comes from success so profound. It silences every voice that ever dared to doubt your worth.